Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this afternoon's webinar. My name's David Connolly. I'm the Aberdeen Chapter Chair, which is part of the Scottish branch.
And I'm with the Engineering Project Academy at the University of Leeds, and this afternoon I'm going to be walking you through the Project Initiation Routemap. But before we get into the how, when, and why, a quick bit of background about myself. I'm a theme leader in capability development, and what my primary focus is is looking at the development of the intelligent client. Apologies for my voice today. I am suffering a bit of a cold. Hopefully the audio is still all right. Our work at the Engineering Project Academy in the area of intelligent clienting has informed the development of a number of things that you might be aware of, including the Institution for Civil Engineers' recently released Intelligent Client Framework, and of course the capability assessments that underpin the Project Initiation Routemap. For me, the Routemap journey started with the idea of articulating the competencies that define the intelligent client and the behaviors that support intelligent clienting. Now, competency and more broadly capability are terms that are frequently used in relation to the ability of key parties to work together to achieve the desired outcomes from major projects and programs. In the early stages of the development of the Routemap, the Engineering Project Academy was attempting to better understand what this meant for really good client supply chain working. And what has come out of this research has ended up being a much bigger step into identifying how and why major infrastructure projects fall short of expectations. The Routemap work brings together a body of evidence around the importance of creating the right delivery environment for increasing the likelihood of delivering the expected benefits from major economic infrastructure projects. It does this while also recognizing the significance of the sponsor role during project initiation to achieving a successful outcome. In the initial trials of the Routemap, which I'll touch on later in the presentation, we found that this led to the development of guidance supporting an approach to infrastructure projects that works to align delivery strategies with the complexity of the delivery environment and the capabilities of the organizations involved, be that the sponsor, the client, and the market. I've been involved myself in the development and implementation of the Routemap since its inception as a piece of work jointly undertaken by the University of Leeds and Infrastructure UK, in which we were looking at verifying our research in a trial application at Crossrail. This afternoon, I'm going to go through the outputs of that journey from Crossrail to the current pipeline of route mapping and how we have been supporting those delivering major economic infrastructure to close their own capability gaps. The intent of this talk is to convey how the Routemap has been developed, how it works to improve the delivery of major infrastructure projects, and how you can access support for your own organization. Also, I'll go through when to use the systemic approach, the tools and the associated guidance, and why it is rapidly being championed as best practice. A bit of background on the Routemap and its development. In 2010, the Infrastructure Cost Review Report identified that there were opportunities to make a savings of roughly 15% through improved delivery of the public and private sector infrastructure pipelines. As part of that accompanying implementation plan, Infrastructure UK, which for those of you who don't know is a unit of HMT that works to support the UK's long-term infrastructure priorities, they have been working with sponsors and industry to unlock the opportunities for those efficiency savings and improve the delivery of economic infrastructure. In support of this, they formed an infrastructure client group comprised of clients from across the infrastructure space. The emphasis from that group on intelligent clienting and improving industry relationships has been demonstrated time and again, and also by the inclusion of academia and industry bodies such as the Major Projects Association in their membership. The Project Initiation Routemap is a product of government working with the client group, the trial project participants, such as Crossrail, HS2, Anglian Water, to name a few, and with the University of Leeds as their primary development partner to support infrastructure providers in optimizing the delivery environment for major projects and programs. The route map does all of this by providing a structured approach to assessing and improving sponsor, client, and market capability and integration. It brings together a set of assessment tools in an integrated process aimed at improving the capability of sponsors and clients to plan, execute, and operate major infrastructure projects. What it is an aid to strategic decision-making during project initiation and at other critical decision points. And I add this because while the route map builds in most value during the project planning, it is also a useful sanity check and intervention aid throughout the project lifecycle. This is important to remember because the nature of major infrastructure projects in the UK, i.e. bidding for funding, required parliamentary consent, etc., has meant that the route map is often applied in this manner. Within the route map, there is a set of assessment tools that provide a lens for sponsors and clients to view the complexity of the delivery environment in which they're working, the capability required to manage that complexity at the sponsor, client, and asset management and supply chain levels, and also the key considerations as to where value may be being lost and areas where it can be further embedded. The assessment tools support the alignment of the sponsor and client organization's capability to meet the degree of challenge during initiation and delivery of the project. To put it another way, the route map provides an objective and systemic approach to project initiation, founded on a set of assessment tools that help you determine the complexity and context of your delivery environment, unique to each project, the existing and required sponsor, client, and asset manager and market capabilities, their level of alignment and any gaps, and also the key considerations to enhance that capability where complexity and capability gaps have been identified. What the route map is not, it is not a prescriptive process. It is meant to enable reflection on the project and its environment. The route map is not something that is done to you like an audit. It is done with you to trigger the conversations that need to be had and ensure that adequate and timely consideration is given to create the delivery environment needed to successfully navigate the complexity of major projects. It is not a route to a single solution. It is recognized that there is no one-size-fits-all solution to the delivery of complex infrastructure projects. However, the common characteristics for effective delivery can be applied consistently. It ensures that the right questions are asked at the critical points in the project lifecycle. It is not a replacement for existing assurance and review procedures, though it can support these and often bookend stage gates nicely. It is not a maturity model for organizational assessments. The capability assessments look at organizational capability with respect to a specific undertaking and add most value when used proactively to identify the execution strategy that best suits the project and/or the deliverers. When using the route map as a health check, it can flag organization-wide issues that need enhancing, and it often does, but this is a byproduct, not an output of the approach. And lastly, it is not a replacement for best practice guidance. It does, however, reference good practices where relevant in the modules and through its underpinning of peer challenge from an industry support group. The route map, as I've stated, can be described as a suite of assessment tools developed to enable sponsors, clients, and the supply chain to align their behaviors and identify capability gaps. Within this suite, there's a complexity assessment adopted from the National Audit Office's DECA that considers the nature of the delivery environment or exactly how tricky it is what you are trying to do. There's a set of capability assessments that look at the existing or required capability to manage that trickiness. There is also guidance on how to use the assessments to identify areas of misalignment between capability and complexity. And there's a further set of diagnostic tools or modules that help with strategic decision making based on the areas of common misalignment found throughout our route map pilots. The initial pilots and subsequent applications of the route map, both on the published pipeline of projects and in other sectors, have demonstrated its value as a framework for project sponsors and clients, to take a forensic look at their capability and identify areas for enhancement. This evidence that we found that it can add significant value came very early on in the pilot applications. For example, in the first application at Crossrail, the learning they took as an organization from the approach included how understanding the environment you have gives you the opportunity to create the one you need. Also, when planning for a major transition, like that from design to construction, consider what differing skills, organizational structures, and processes are required at the different phases. And the most important part of that is what lead times they require to be established. And also they learned to reflect on the optimal program interfaces to avoid ending up with them by accident, expending unnecessary resource, i.e. don't let predetermined delivery model drive your decision making. At Network Rail, the head of the National Operating Strategy commented on how he found it a useful stocktake of their capital program, and that there was value from this systematic approach to improvement. The Environment Agency also champions it as support for strategic decision-making, stating, not only did the process work in helping to identify the approach to procurement through constructive challenge in a series of workshops, it also gave confidence during subsequent assurance that the right solution was being pursued. Other learning from the applications that have been articulated by Routemap partners include Professor Denise Bauer from the Major Projects Association, and she describes how the issues that lead to poor execution of major projects are not usually rooted in individual shortcomings. They are systemic failures that should have been addressed during initiation. This means that aligning for success has to start as early as possible and to be planned holistically, and that's what the Routemap attempts to achieve. The National Audit Office also captures their support of the Routemap approach, stating, "Too often projects are started on an unrealistic basis, so it is no surprise that there are problems in delivery." The MPA has been delighted to support the evolution of the Routemap, and that's the Major Projects Authority, not association. The evolution of the Routemap is a way of providing a more structured approach to understanding the challenges facing infrastructure projects and their deliverability. Who should use the Routemap? The Routemap is aimed primarily at public or private sector sponsor and client organizations that deliver major infrastructure projects. However, our trials in the skills development and health sectors have demonstrated the transferability of the approach, and in some cases the accompanying guidance, though scalability and relevance to the expected benefits are considerations. The Routemap also provides particular value where a proposed project is either A, new to the participating organizations, for example, high-speed rail, B, where the proposed project is being delivered in a different way, for example, transformational projects when an organization wants to work differently, and or C, when the project is on a significantly bigger scale than those previously undertaken by the organizations involved. It can be used in part, or in full or in part, and depending on the context of the project, the degree of challenge it is facing from its delivery environment, and the stage in the project life cycle, the Routemap and supporting material have been designed to allow users to walk through step by step or dip in and out when support is required. How the Routemap works. It can be broken down and viewed as a four-stage approach, really. The tools within the Routemap assess the capability at the sponsor, client, and asset management levels, and also the market, together with the complexity of the project environment. Through this analysis, areas of alignment and misalignment can be identified. The Routemap approach, firstly, includes an assessment and information gathering phase. In this, the user decides on the project or concept in which you are going to Routemap, and then completes the assessments of complexity and capability. The assessments can be used as self-assessment, a peer assessment, or as or can be done by an external party. The accompanying information gathering typically comprises interviews with key project personnel and a document review. The outputs of that phase are then synthesized to look for overall alignment of the capabilities to the degree of challenge and identify any major issues and opportunities. Also, make sure that there is alignment between what you are doing and who is undertaking what role. There can be surprising gaps in understanding across many organizations, especially when you're looking to do something differently. It also helps to sort the findings from this gap analysis into systemic issues. You can do this in line with areas of opportunity common to successful infrastructure projects, such as governance or benefits management. Root causes of the issues and opportunities should be identified so that work streams for closing the gaps can be initiated. Areas of misalignment can be subdivided into quick wins, priority actions, and potentially broader organizational issues. Typically, these will relate to either reducing the complexity, enhancing the party's capability, or taking a completely different approach. Enhancement should be planned systemically in order to pick up any interdependencies of decision-making across the work streams and any ongoing activity. Your enhancements can then be delivered in a timely manner, and improvements in efficiencies tracked. This is important because a route map can be a very cyclical process. When to use the route map. If we take this generic project life cycle, it shows the optimum stages for using the various components of the route map. The route map can be used throughout a project's life, but is most useful early on in the life cycle when you're specifying and initiating the project. It is also useful whenever there are significant changes to a project that require its structure and delivery strategies to be reconsidered. Remember, and this is key, the route map is not a project management tool. It helps to support informed decision-making, which then allows for project and/or program management to successfully take over and deliver the expected outputs and outcomes. So now we'll move on and look at the assessments in more detail. A lack of understanding of the context in which a project is being created and delivered is a significant contributory factor to project failure. Understanding the wider project environment is especially important where the proposed project may in itself be more complex or on a larger scale than normal, or is being delivered in a novel way. The route map uses the Delivery Environment Complexity Assessment, or DECA as we refer to it. This is a tool developed by the National Audit Office. The DECA acts as a focus for discussion using the 12 factors that have been evidenced to be key influencers in major project success or failure. This is from the experience of the National Audit Office over their portfolio. Consideration of these factors help to paint a high-level picture of how the complexity is being or is to be managed or reduced. The complexity factors include strategic importance. Is the project critical to the delivery of the organization's strategic objectives or obligations? Stakeholders or influencers. Are there a significant number of stakeholders with a high level of influence? Requirements and benefits articulation. Is there ambiguity around the expected benefits or uncertainty around the impact of the project? The stability of the overall context. Is there a high or low risk of change? Financial impact and value for money. Does the project represent a significant investment to the organization? Execution complexity. Are there new or untested business practices or technology? Interfaces and relationships. Does the project span many boundaries? Range of discipline and skills. Is there a potential to strain the supply chain? The dependencies. Is the project critical to the delivery of other projects? The extent of change. Does it represent business as usual, or does it represent significant organizational change? And lastly, interconnectedness. Is there consideration of the relationships between policy, culture, practices, technology, people, processes, and procedure? And has this been communicated to the rest of the organization? These are the 12 key factors that can generate complexity in the delivery environment. And when you complete the complexity assessment, you go through and rate each factor as low, medium, or high based on polar rating statements provided in the guidance. It is this analysis that provides input into the complexity capability gap analysis, and it also generates a profile, so low, medium, high, red, amber, green, for each project that can be used by the sponsor and client to sanity check risk and readiness at various points in the project life cycle. So if you have a profile that is primarily red or primarily high complexity, this should be used to inform the rest of your decision making and used to sanity check that you're managing these specific areas. Overall, it helps to improve the team understanding of what they will need to deal with when they're delivering a project. If we move to look at the capability assessments, the Routemap has capability assessments for the sponsor, client, asset manager, organizations, and also the market. Each of the assessment provides a set of observable characteristics that represent the organizational capability as it applies to the project. These characteristics can be used to reflect on current or needed capabilities for successful delivery, i.e. to manage the complexity of that delivery environment profile. The characteristics are grouped into 3 sets for each of the parties involved. There's red characteristics that are indicative of a failing system. Any individual red characteristic will hold an organization back regardless of any other good practice. These characteristics either need to be addressed or allowances made for the consequences. Green characteristics are seen in systems that are performing acceptably. The systems may be appropriately governed, but they're not fully optimized. And lastly, there are blue characteristics, which are indicative of effective or an efficient system. Not all projects will require blue characteristics to be successful. This needs to be aligned with the complexity profile from the DECA. It is important to remember that these 3 sets of characteristics should not be seen as a progressive scale. They are snapshots of the systemic capability, or they can be seen as representative of typical vulnerable, managed, and optimized organizations. Remember, an organization can demonstrate a mix of all 3 at any one time. For example, a client organization could have the red characteristic of blurred governance structures while still demonstrating the blue characteristic of informed use of competition. They, however, are unlikely to maximize the full benefit from what they're trying to do without addressing that anchoring characteristic first. The gap analysis portion of the approach involves reviewing the assessment outputs and information gathered during the first stage of this process. It can include evaluating the overall alignment of capabilities to the challenge as described by the completed assessments in the DECA profile, evaluating the issues and opportunities related to that complexity capability gap identified, and other systemic issues identified through the process. An identified capability complexity gap could be that one of the participants, or that the participants feel that the delivery environment is highly complex, so a mainly red profile, but that the organizations involved are demonstrating primarily red capability. The project may need to consider upskilling or reducing the complexity in order to close that gap. Other gaps could include misalignment between capabilities of the involved parties. For example, it might not be wise for or represent best value for client organizations to be misaligned with the market capability. Diagnosis of the root causes of these issues and opportunities may identify a number of enhancements, and these can include obvious quick wins for addressing those red level characteristics, issues, or opportunities, priority actions, and longer term enhancements. And this can include those at the corporate level, and any interdependencies for decision making across your planned enhancements. Key to diagnosis is understanding the common areas where major infrastructure projects have issues. The Routemap targets its assessment and support at these common characteristics of both success and underperformance. And our evidence from the pilots has pointed to these recurring issues with all of the above: requirements, governance, execution strategy, and the selection of the delivery model. And as I said, the accompanying organizational design and development. It's this holistic incorporation of the principles that need to filter through into that procurement strategy, and the Routemap helps you do that. The Routemap also provides further diagnostic support of the first stage outputs through a suite of Align for Success modules. As discussed, these modules relate to a number of common themes that emerge through the Routemap pilots. Applying the suggestions in the Align for Success modules will result in the creation of strategies and plans to help address the assessment findings. We found that your enhancement plans fall into 3 categories. 1, enhancing corporate capability, so addressing those opportunities or weaknesses external to the project. The assessment process tends to be a bit cathartic for participants and often brings up other institutional issues that impact on the project performance. 2, enhancing project capability, addressing opportunities or weaknesses within the project to manage the delivery environment. And lastly, 3, shaping the project execution strategy, decisions or actions to go into the execution strategy to deliver those required outcomes. The modules broadly go over things that should be influencing early decision making, such as how to align the project with the organization's objectives, the benefits it's expected to deliver, and how the benefits can be managed to significantly increase the certainty of project success. They go over how all the parties involved in the project can be allocated the right level of authority and accountability so that key decisions can be made with confidence throughout the life of the project. They cover how the project can set up to fulfill the requirements, adhere to the government's needs, manage its risk, and set its delivery strategy within which the organizational structure and procurement strategies can then be formulated. Cover how to determine and enhance the structure of the project organization, including determining the optimal boundaries for in-house and external resource provision. They also provide a diagnostic for identifying transition points in the project lifecycle. And lastly, how to engage with the market, determine the optimum allocation of risk between client, organization, and the supply chain, package up the work to be procured, and identify the most appropriate procurement form of contract. So briefly, I'll go into some examples of how the route map has been applied and the results it has achieved for the organizations in the pilots. So firstly, if we look at the Anglian Water example, Anglian, or the @ONE Alliance, used the route map to review the proposed strategy for the reprocurement of that alliance and their supply chain. The review was undertaken early in the overall process to really test the principles of the proposed model and to ensure that any gaps identified could be sufficiently addressed through the incorporation into the existing development plans. The route map review highlighted the critical dependency between a model that sought benefits from greater integration of the supply chain and from initiatives that required a different way of working, such as industrialized construction. Resulting from this review, an exercise was undertaken which mapped the different capabilities needed to deliver this new way of working. And this included capabilities outside the traditional water industry supply chain. This subsequently led Anglian to a procurement strategy that included a greater degree of market making, and also it identified the appropriate commercial model for each part of the alliance supply chain with a general shift towards greater collaboration and incentivized contracts. We take the Environment Agency. The Environment Agency developed its commercial and procurement strategy for their TEP 1 investment program and used the route map to validate the agency's approach prior to seeking business case approval. The outcome of the route map was a more detailed action plan regarding further development of the client model, including enhancement plans for the agency's capability to apply this new client model. The TEP 1 route map trial has emphasize the benefit of applying the process at the development stage, embedding that value early in a project's life cycle, and this has meant building evidence for the outlined business case and substantiating the proposed commercial strategy. At HS2, the route map review focused on consideration of the governance ranges needed for the upcoming phase of the project and the development of high-performing sponsor, client, and delivery organizations. The output of the review is fed into work on a development agreement between HS2 as a client and DFT as the sponsor. And this was really key in sorting out responsibilities of a project that spans many complex boundaries. If we look at an application to a capital delivery program in the route map application with Surrey County Council, the route map identified the need to establish a dedicated project team for their highways maintenance and improvement program. And this team was tasked with addressing the asset knowledge gap and articulating the outcomes in the form of a robust business case with a clear plan for how the expected benefits would be managed and measured. And to close this out, some of the things that you need to consider in determining what approach to take in applying the route map at your organization include the extent to which you might need more in-depth analysis and challenge. For example, the route map can be a self-assessment where you are managing and leading your own staff through the assessment. This does reduce the time spent in interviews and the document capture, but it is recommended that the assessments are carried out by someone with some level of independence, such as a Center of Excellence or your corporate PMO. The route map can be a peer assessment with the sponsor and client looking at each other, holding that mirror up that way. And this approach will provide the requisite challenge to any built-in assumptions, but to gain the maximum benefit from it, it's recommended that you do bring in independent facilitation to run the any workshop processes. And of course, the route map can also be a fully independent assessment completed with the help of a specialist consultancy, or if you're one of the top 40 projects, Infrastructure UK. This, of course, incurs more cost, but it has the advantage of being independent from start to finish, and people are often more open in the interviews about their organizations, potential shortcomings, or missed opportunities when speaking to a party that promises anonymity and is not directly linked to the project.
Are the supply chain delivery partners involved and engaged in the route map assessment process?
They can be. It really depends on a number of things. What stage in project planning you're at. Obviously, it can be quite sensitive, so you may not want to start the early engagement process before you've really formulated what you're doing, or some people are quite open with their supply chain, so it's really dependent on the individual project, whether you want to take them through that journey or not.
Why do you use red, green, blue and not the more traditional red, amber, green?
To be honest, it's a bit of a political thing. But it's because when you're looking at the capability assessment, it is completely fine to function at the green level. Many organizations are there having some red characteristics, demonstrating some blue characteristics. It's not really, there isn't really a space for that amber level.
How do you keep a handle, in terms of keeping them on board, how do you keep a handle on the stakeholders that are not directly affected by the project, but will use it when it is completed?
Well, it's really up to the individual project and how they want to address that particular element that increases the complexity of the project. The route map really isn't a process to help you do that. It does trigger different considerations that would lead you to make a decision on how you're going to do that.
Has it been applied to IT projects?
We have not done it to what you might consider a traditional IT project as yet. We do recognize that they are a bit of their own beast. However, the one we did in the health sector could be seen as an IT project, and there was a lot of learning coming out of there.